The Invisible Man is an 1897 novel written by H.G. Wells, and it's been adapted plenty of times for the screen and on radio as well. Today, I'm going to take two of those adaptations, the 1933 original film by James Whale, directed by James Whale and starring Claude Rains, and the most recent take, directed by Leigh Whannell and starring Elisabeth Moss. So I'm going to take these two vastly different interpretations of the source material. I'm going to compare the two of them, see where they differ, see where they may have some similarities, and then I'm going to ask that all-important question, who did it better? So first things first, I'll get into the similarities because there aren't really many, to be honest. Both films have an antagonist named Griffin as their surname. In the original film from James Whale, he's called Dr. Jack Griffin, and he's a molecular physicist who wants to try and see if he can come up with a way to make human beings invisible. And spoiler alert, he's actually successful in this endeavor. He ends up making himself invisible, but then the whole plot revolves around, can he then make himself go back to being a normal human being? Can he reverse this experiment? And in the updated version that we saw a few years ago from Leigh Whannell, he's called Adrian Griffin, and he's basically a tech bro. He's heavily into technology, and he's very, very rich, as we can see from his big ass house. But he manages to design a high-tech suit, a black suit that he keeps hidden away in kind of a secret part of his house that, yeah, spoiler alert, it manages to make him invisible. So it's not actually a scientific experiment, which is from the original novel and from obviously the 1933 film that we're talking about today. So that's the main kind of similarity, is they're both called Griffin, but as I've already mentioned, yeah, they diverge quite heavily from here, and here's how. Well, for one thing, the original film, Dr. Jack Griffin he's the main character. He is the antagonist, but he's the main character. He's the character we spend the most time with. Whereas in the updated film, the 2020 version, the reimagining from Leigh Whannell, the main character we follow is Cecilia, who is the partner, the wife of this Adrian Griffin guy. And it's pretty clear from very, very early on in the film that she's in a bad way. She's been kept down, and she's been psychologically abused and physically abused by her husband, Adrian Griffin, and she's looking for a way out. And then the film revolves around Cecilia's attempts to finally move on from her husband, from this malevolent presence. But every time she tries to, yeah, she's not able to. Everyone thinks her husband, Adrian, is dead, but it turns out, spoiler alert, he's not after all, and he's making Cecilia's life hell. He's gaslighting everyone around her into believing that she's gone crazy, that she's adamant that her husband isn't actually dead, and because there was a body and a corpse and a funeral and all this stuff, and she's been paid life insurance, she's been given money from the estate of her dead husband. Yeah, nobody believes her. So yeah, the 1933 version, directed by James Whale, it's quite camp at times. It's pretty funny, if I'm honest. It's quite sinister at times as well, and it is quite dark, but it's quite playful, it's quite camp, and he has a lot of fun in the lead role. It's also set in a small town in England, and it's entirely English cast. Claude Rains is English himself, and it has this quite kind of low budget feel to it. But even with all that said, the special effects, the practical effects are really good. Like, for the time, for the early 1930s, it's really impressive what they managed to do with these special effects. When we finally see Claude Rains as Dr. Jack invisible and he's performing all these stunts, it really is quite convincing, really. There's one or two moments, yeah, where you can maybe pick out, but considering the time period and considering the fact that, yeah, like, obviously today we have a lot more money and a lot more resources and a lot more means to kind of make this stuff look much more realistic, as we'll come on to. They do a really good job of actually convincing you that this is just an invisible man. Like, it is what it says on the tin, really. It's the title character does not lie to you. The 2020 film, by comparison, is much more psychologically dark and horrific, really. What it puts Cecilia through as a character, what she goes through, it just constantly goes from one bad thing to another horrible thing, and it's really, it doesn't really let up. At no point does it really let up, and yeah, it puts her through the ringer, really. There's not too many jokes in here. There's one or two. Her friend, played by Aldous Hodge, does have a couple of moments of kind of levity, but for the most part, it just wants Cecilia to go through as horrible a time as possible, and so that I can really obviously investigate these things like abuse and like gaslighting. It wants to investigate all of these things in a very smart screenplay, in a very smart way, but it's not playful and it's not camp. So tonally, the two films are completely different. They don't really have anything in common. So while the 2020 version does want to talk about and does want to deal with issues like abuse, like violence against women, like gaslighting, these kinds of stuff in a really dark and kind of realistic way. Say realistic, obviously you're dealing with an invisible man, but like it deals with it in a very grounded way. The original film does also deal with kind of social issues at the time as well. So obviously we know the 1930s is a time of major political upheaval across Europe. And Claude Rains' character, Dr. Jack Griffin, once he takes this stuff and once it makes him invisible, he does start to kind of go mad. He does start to lose his mind, and he starts to kind of become more and more villainous. And he goes on these long rants, these long crazy rants about wanting to take over the world, about how he wants to murder people, all this crazy stuff. So yeah, it does have a lot of fun with the premise, as I said, but it does also deal with these kind of social issues of the time as well. So from that point of view, both films are dealing with really heavy stuff, but in very tonally different ways. Obviously the 1933 film is doing it in a much more playful way, whereas the 2020 film is, yeah, it's quite heavy. It's quite heavy and it's quite dark and it's quite grounded. In terms of the action set pieces, then this is really where both films do have fun with the premise. So the 1933 film featuring Claude Rains has Claude Rains kind of wreaking havoc across the police. Like he's robbing banks, he's having fun with the police, this whole police kind of investigation, this whole police manhunt, trying to catch this guy. He has a lot of fun with it. It has very snowy landscapes, so you have the 2 or 3 great scenes in the snow where it kind of tracks his footsteps and stuff like this. And so they just have a lot of fun, the film, with this idea of an invisible man. It gets a lot of mileage out of the premise, but again, it doesn't shirk on the kind of the horrific elements as well, because at the end of the day, he is doing some really horrible stuff, some really dastardly stuff. As opposed to the 2020 film, which, yeah, it does manage to kind of, has some fun in the sense of, it gets creative, is probably a better way to say it. There's a prison set piece towards the end of the film, which is really dark, how he uses the camera. Cecilia is, again, put through the ringer time and time again, as well as kind of people she cares about. Again, her friend and his daughter, they don't have a good time with it. And then, of course, the most famous scene in the film, I'd say, the dinner scene with Cecilia and her sister, which I won't spoil for anyone who hasn't seen the film. I won't spoil what happens, but suffice to say, it's one of the most shocking films in recent horror, I'd say. I couldn't believe it when I first saw it, and I rewatched the film recently in preparation for this, and yeah, it hasn't lost any of its impact. It's so dark and it's so shocking, and how out of nowhere it comes. So in conclusion, I think both adaptations are really great, to be honest. I think the 1933 film is certainly a more faithful adaptation from what I've read. I haven't actually read the original novel, but everything I read online says that it's quite faithful to the original source novel. Claude Rains just absolutely kills it as Dr. Jack Griffin. You really feel that this is a guy slowly and surely, or maybe not even slowly and surely, maybe quite quickly, to be honest, losing his humanity. He starts to do more and more dastardly things, and he starts to really enjoy the fact that he's wreaking havoc on people, and he really starts to kind of give in to his baser instincts. The film, like I said, has a lot of great supporting turns. It does have some really fun action set pieces, particularly in the snow and in the stable, like I said. So yeah, it's a really great early horror film that's worth going out of your way to see, I think. And I think the same goes as well for the 2020 version. It's much darker and it's much more bleak, and it completely pulverizes Cecilia. I mean, Elisabeth Moss is an incredible actress. She's one of my favorite actresses working today, to be honest. And I think a lesser actor would have been, they would have struggled with this, but she just managed to sell the complete hopelessness of the situation. She's put through the ringer. She's put through a situation where no one believes what she's saying. She's obviously been through a hell of a lot of abuse of all sorts, really horrible stuff. She manages to sell the situation completely. But from a filmmaking point of view, it's really sleek as well. Some really fun camera movements. The production design and the set design again is top tier, especially the house, the big house by the sea, looks incredible. Again, great supporting turns, Aldous Hodge, Harriet Dyer, Storm Reid is great as well, some really fun stuff. I do need to choose which film I think is better, who did it better in my opinion, and I have to say I do prefer the original 1933 version just by its smidge. I haven't read the original novel, so I don't really mind too much whether it's faithful or not adaptation. I just want to see a really fun, a really creative interpretation, kind of a really fun story. So overall, I think the 1933 film, in my opinion, is a slightly more enjoyable experience. It's more playful, it's more camp, it's more humorous. Claude Rains has a lot of fun in the lead role. And overall, yeah, I just prefer the slightly more intimate nature of the film. I think it's a tighter screenplay as well. There's not a lot of fat in there. It's quite like everything is in there for a reason. While both films are great, and I do absolutely recommend watching both films, I just give the edge to the 1933 version directed by James Whale. So in my opinion, who did it better? That all important question. I'm going to go with the 1933 version. So yeah, thanks very much everyone. You can check out the Invisible Man podcast episode that we did, episode 26 of the Golden Hour Film Podcast. Yeah, it's up now. It's a really good episode, I think. Check out, obviously there's a bunch of other stuff we've done up there, so yeah, we'll check out the next time on the Golden Hour Film Podcast. We're going to try and keep doing some more of this kind of stuff, some more shorter videos as and when we find the time, and as and when we can think of stuff to do and some creative stuff to do. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.